shoes.
There was once a little girl, very pretty and delicate.
She was so poor that in summer she always went barefoot, and in winter wore large wooden shoes that made her little ankles quite red and sore.
In the same village lived an old shoemaker's wife.
One day she made a pair of little shoes out of some old pieces of red cloth. They were certainly clumsy, but they fitted the little girl fairly well, and she gave them to her.
The little girl's name was Karen. It was on the day of her mother's funeral that the red shoes were given to Karen.
They were not at all proper for mourning, but she had no others. Karen walked along with bare legs in the shoes, behind her mother's poor wooden coffin.
Just then a large old carriage rolled by. In it sat a large old lady, who saw the little girl and pitied her. She said to the priest sitting next to her, "Give me that little girl, and I will take care of her."
Karen thought that the old lady had taken a fancy to her because of the red shoes, but she was wrong.
"Those red shoes are really quite frightful, Karen. They must be burned."
But they are all I have. The shoemaker's wife gave them to me.
"Never mind. I shall give you many pretty dresses and many pretty shoes. Throw those horrid things away."
So Karen was dressed very neatly and was taught to read and to work hard. And people told her she was pretty. But the mirror in her bedroom told her,
"You are more than pretty. You are beautiful, Karen. You are beautiful."
One day the queen with her little daughter passed through the town where Karen lived, and all the people, Karen amongst them, flooded in front of the palace, whilst the little princess stood dressed in white at a window for everyone to see her.
She wore neither a train nor a gold crown, but on her feet were pretty red Moroccan shoes, much prettier indeed than those the shoemaker's wife had made for little Karen. Nothing in the world could be compared with these red shoes.
Soon Karen was old enough to be confirmed. She was to have a new frock, new shoes especially made for the occasion. The rich shoemaker in the town measured her little foot in his own room, where there was a large glass case full of neat shoes and shining boots.
They looked very pretty, but the old lady, whose sight was not very good, did not notice them much. Amongst all these shoes was a pair of red ones, just like those worn by the princess. "Yes, they are of polished leather. See how they shine."
Yes, so beautifully. May I try them on? Oh, please, may I?
The shoes fitted Karen perfectly, and so they were bought. But the old lady did not know that they were red, or she would never have allowed Karen to go to the confirmation in them. But Karen did go.
Everybody in the church looked at her feet, and as she walked up the nave to the chancel, it seemed to her that even the stone figures fixed their eyes on her beautiful red shoes. when she knelt before the altar, she could only think of her beautiful red shoes.
That afternoon, when the old lady was told that Karen had worn red shoes at her confirmation, she was very angry and told Karen that in future, whenever she went to church, she must wear only black shoes.
On the next Sunday, Karen was to make her first communion in church. In her little bedroom, she looked first at the red shoes, then at the black, then at the red again, and quickly put them on. It was a beautiful sunshiny day, so Karen and the old lady walked to church through the cornfields, for the road was dusty.
At the church door stood an old soldier with a strange reddish-coloured beard. He was leaning on crutches, and he bowed almost to the earth in front of them.
Madame, please allow me to wipe the dust off your shoes.
Why, thank you. Will you wipe this little girl's shoes also? They really are so dusty.
Oh, what pretty dancing shoes. Mind you do not let them slip off when you dance.
The soldier passed his hands over the shoes. The old lady gave the soldier some money, and then she and Karen went into the church. Again, everyone looked at Karen's red shoes.
And when Karen knelt before the altar, the picture of her red shoes still floated before her eyes.
At last all the people came out of the church, and the old lady got into her carriage. Karen was lifting her foot to follow, when the old soldier standing in the porch cried,
Look, everybody, look at those pretty dancing shoes.
And Karen found she could not help dancing a few steps. Once she had begun dancing, her feet kept moving by themselves as though the shoes had a magic power in them.
The coachman was obliged to run after her, take hold of her, and lift her into the carriage. But even then, her feet kept on dancing, so much so that the good old lady got many a hard kick. At last the shoes were taken off, and her feet were able to rest.
The magical red shoes were put away in a cupboard, but Karen could not help going to look at them every now and then. After a while, the old lady lay very ill in bed, and the doctor said she would never get better. She needed careful nursing, and who was there to be her nurse and constant companion but Karen?
Karen had been invited to the grand ball that was going to be held in town. She thought of the dying old lady. She looked at the red shoes, and she thought there could be no harm in putting them on. Then the red shoes took her to the ball and began to dance.
But when she wanted to move to the right, the shoes moved her to the left. And when she wanted to dance up the room, the shoes danced down the room. She danced down the stairs, through the streets, and through the gate of the town. She danced on, in spite of herself, till she danced into a dark wood.
Something shone through the trees. She thought at first it must be the moon shining through the mist. Then she saw what it was. It was the face of the old soldier with the red beard. He sat there, nodding at her, and repeating,
See what pretty dancing shoes they are. See what pretty dancing shoes they are.
Karen was frightened and tried to pull off her red shoes then and there, but they stuck fast to her feet. She tore off her stockings, but the shoes seemed to have grown onto her feet. Something was forcing her to go on and on dancing, over field and meadow, in rain and in sunshine, by night and by day.
It was most terrible for her at night. She danced across the open churchyard. If she could have, she would even have sat down on the poor man's grave where the bitter ferns grow. But for her, there was neither rest nor quiet.
She danced past the open church door, and there before her she saw an angel, clad in long white robes and with wings that reached from his shoulders to the ground. His face was grave and stern, and in his hand he held a bright, glittering sword.
Dance on in thy red shoes, till thou art pale and cold, and thy skin shrinks and shrivels up like a skeleton. You shall dance from door to door, and wherever proud, vain children live, you shall knock at their doors, so that they may hear you and be afraid. Dance shalt thou, dance on and on and on.
Oh, please, mercy! Please have mercy on me, for I am so tired.
She did not hear the angel's answer, for her shoes carried her through the gate into the fields, along highways and byways. And still she had to dance on. She danced past a door she knew well. She heard people singing hymns inside, and she saw a coffin covered with sweet-smelling flowers being carried out.
Then Karen understood straight away that the good old lady was dead, and she felt abandoned and condemned by the angel of God. Still, on she felt, forced to dance even more into the dark night. The shoes carried her through bushes and thorns until her legs were torn and bleeding.
Then she danced across the heath to a little lonely house where she knew the headsman lived, and she tapped with her fingers against the panes, crying out,
Come out! Come out! I cannot come in, for I must dance and dance.
Surely you do not know who I am, little girl. Beware. I cut off the heads of wicked men, and I notice now that my axe is quivering.
Do not cut off my head, kind sir, for then I could not live to feel sorry for all my sins. But please, will you cut off my feet with these horrible red shoes?
She confessed all her sins, and the headsman cut off her feet with the red shoes on them. And the shoes with those little feet in them danced away over the fields and into the deep forest.
Then the headsman made a pair of wooden feet for Karen, and cut down some branches to make into crutches for her. And he taught her the psalm which sinners sing.
and she kissed the hand that held the axe and limped slowly away across the heath.
Now surely I have suffered quite enough through these red shoes. I will go to church and let people see me once more.
So she felt much braver and went to church. But she did not get any farther than the churchyard gate, for there again she saw the red shoes dancing before her, and in great terror she turned back and repented more deeply than ever her sinful pride. She went to the vicar's house and begged that some work might be given to her, promising to work hard and do all she could, even without wages.
She only wanted a roof to shelter her and to live with good people. And the vicar's wife had pity on her and took her into the house to work. Karen was grateful and industrious. Every evening she sat silently listening to the vicar while he read the Bible aloud. All the children loved her, but when she heard them talk about dresses and beautiful things, and about being as beautiful as a queen, she would sadly shake her head.
The next Sunday, all the vicar's household went to church, and they asked her to go too, but she sighed and looked at her crutches with tears in her eyes.
When they were all gone, she went into her own little room, which was just large enough to hold a bed and a chair, and then she sat with the psalm book in her hand, and as she read in a humble way, the wind carried the sound of the organ from the church to her. She lifted up her tearful face and prayed.
Oh God, please help me. Please help me.
Then the sun shone brightly, and suddenly before her stood the white-robed angel of God, the same one whom she had seen on that night of horror at the church porch.
But he no longer held in his hand a big, threatening sword. Instead, he carried a lovely green branch covered with roses. With this, he touched the ceiling, which at once rose up and up to a great height, and a bright gold star glittered on the spot which the green branch had touched.
He then touched the walls too, and they opened wide, and Karen saw the organ, the old statues, and the congregation all sitting in their richly carved seats and singing from their psalm books. The church had finally come to the poor girl sitting in her narrow room, or rather, the room had become a church for her. She sat with the rest of the people, and when the psalm was finished, they looked up and nodded to her.
The sunbeams streamed through the windows and fell bright and warm on Karen's seat.
Her heart was so full of sunshine, so full of peace and gladness, that it broke.
And her soul flew far away upon a sunbeam to heaven, where not a look of reproach awaited her,
And not a word was breathed about red shoes.
There were once 25 tin soldiers, all brothers, for all had been made out of one old tin spoon.
They carried muskets in their arms and held themselves very upright, and their uniforms were red and blue. The first words they heard in this world when the lid was taken off the box where they lay were...
Tin soldiers? Oh, I'm so happy. They are just what I've been wishing for. What a lovely birthday this is going to be. I'm going to set them out on the table right away.
The soldiers were like each other to a hair, all but one, who had only one leg, because he had been made last, when there was not quite enough tin left.
He stood as firmly, however, upon his one leg as the others did upon their two. And it is this one-legged tin soldier's fortunes that seem to us worthy of being told.
On the table where the tin soldiers stood, there were other playthings, but the most charming of them all was a pretty pasteboard castle. Through its little windows one could look into the rooms.
In front of the castle stood some tiny trees clustering round a little mirror intended to represent a lake, and some waxen swans swam on the lake and were reflected in it. All this was very pretty, but prettiest of all was a little lady standing in the open doorway of the castle. She too was cut out of pasteboard.
She had on a frock of the softest muslin, and a narrow sky-blue ribbon was flung across her shoulders like a scarf. And in the middle of this scarf was set a glittering tinsel rose.
The little lady was a dancer. She stretched out both her arms and raised one of her legs so high in the air that the tin soldier could not see it, and thought she had, like himself, only one leg.
That would be just the wife for me. But then she's of too high a rank. She lives in a castle, and I have only a box, and even that isn't my own. For all our 25 men live in it, so it's no place for her. Still, I must meet her.
Then he laid himself down full length behind a snuff box that stood on the table, so that he had a full view of the delicate little lady still standing on one leg without losing her balance.
When evening came, all the other tin soldiers were put into the box, and the people of the house went to bed.
Then the playthings began to have their own games, to pay visits, to fight battles, and to give balls.
The tin soldiers rattled in the box, for they wished to play too, but the lid would not open.
The nutcrackers jumped around all over the place, and the pencil danced merrily about on the table.
There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk too, but he always talked in verse. The only two who did not move from their places were the tin soldier and the dancer.
She remained standing on the very tip of her toes with outstretched arms, and he stood just as firmly on his one leg, never for a moment taking his eyes off her.
12 o'clock struck, and with a crash the lid of the snuff box sprang open. But there was no snuff in it. There was only a toy puzzle. The servant maid and the little boy came downstairs to look for him, but though they very nearly trod on him, they could not see him.
If the tin soldier had but called out, "Here I am," they might easily have found him, but he thought it would not be becoming for him to cry out, as he was in uniform.
Presently it began to rain. Soon drops were falling thicker and thicker, and there was a perfect downpour. When it was all over, two little street boys came by.
Look! There is a tin soldier! Let us make him a boat so he can sail away.
So they made a boat out of newspaper and put the tin soldier into it. Away it sailed down the gutter, with both the boys running along by the side of it and clapping their hands.
The paper boat rocked to and fro, and every now and then it was whirled round so quickly that the tin soldier became quite giddy.
Still he did not move a muscle, but he looked straight before him and held his musket clasped tightly.
All at once the boat was swept into a long drain, where the tin soldier found it as dark as in his own box.
Just then a great water rat that lived in the drain darted out.
Have you a passport? Show me your passport.
But the little tin soldier was silent and held his musket tighter than ever. The boat sailed on, and the rat followed. How that rat gnashed his teeth and cried out to the sticks and the straws passing by.
Stop him! Stop him! He has not paid the toll. He has not even shown me his passport.
But the stream grew stronger and stronger. The tin soldier could already catch a glimpse of daylight where the tunnel ended, but at the same time he heard a roaring noise that might have made even the boldest soldier tremble.
Where the tunnel ended, the water of the gutter fell splashing into a great canal. This was as dangerous for the tin soldier as a waterfall would be for us.
The waterfall was now so close that he could no longer stand upright.
The boat darted forward. The poor tin soldier held himself as stiffly as possible, so that no one could accuse him of having even blinked.
The boat spun round 3 or 4 times and was filled with water to the brim.
Slowly, it began to sink. The tin soldier stood up to his neck in water.
Deeper and deeper sank the boat, and softer grew the paper, till the water ran over the soldier's head.
The paper now split in two, and the tin soldier fell through the tear and was at once swallowed up by a large fish.
Oh, how dark it was! Darker even than in the tunnel, and much narrower too.
But the tin soldier was as constant as ever, and lay there at full length, still shouldering his musket.
The fish swam to and fro, and made the strangest movements, but at last he became quite still.
After a while, a flash of lightning seemed to dart through him, and the daylight shone brightly, and someone cried out,
Oh, my goodness me! I do declare here is the tin soldier.
The fish had been caught, taken to the market, sold, and brought into the kitchen, where a servant girl was cutting it up with a large knife. She seized the tin soldier by the middle with 2 of her fingers and took him into the sitting room.
Just look what I have found in the middle of the big fish I bought in the market for lunch today.
Everyone was eager to see the wonderful man who had travelled in the inside of a fish.
They set him on the table. And what strange things do happen in the world. The tin soldier was in the very room in which he had been before.
He saw the same children, the same playthings on the table, and among them the same beautiful castle, with the same pretty little dancing maiden, who was still standing on one leg, while she held the other high in the air.
She too was constant. It quite touched the tin soldier. He could have probably found it in his heart to weep tin tears, but such weakness would have been unbecoming in a soldier.
He looked at her, and she looked at him, but neither spoke a word.
And now one of the boys took the soldier and threw him into the stove.
No doubt it was the fault of that goblin in the snuff-box. The tin soldier now stood in a blaze of light.
He felt extremely hot, but whether from the air or from the feelings of love, he did not know.
He had entirely lost his colour. Whether this was the result of his travels or the effect of strong feeling, we do not know.
He looked at the little lady, and she looked at him, and he felt that he was melting. But constant as ever, he stood shouldering his arms.
A door opened, and the draught caught the dancer, and like a sylph, she flew straight into the stove to the tin soldier.
Instantly, she was in a blaze and was gone.
The soldier melted, and dripped down amongst the ashes, and when the maid cleaned out the fireplace the next day, she found his remains in the shape of a little tin heart.
Of the dancer, all that was left was the tinsel rose.
And that was burned as black as coal.